Welcome to The Economy Magazine at I-24 News. I'm Natalie Ehrlich. Well, now to the day's global economic stories. Amid the competitive mobile marketplace, Blackberry is out with a new strategy. Lebanon's economy is strained by Syrian refugees, but now also faces a water shortage. And Indonesia turns to renewable energy to handle its electricity needs. Well, Swiss banking giant Credit Suisse pleaded guilty to helping Americans cheat on their taxes. The bank has done what no other of its size and significance has done in 2 decades, admit to a crime in a U.S. courtroom. As part of a deal announced Monday, Credit Suisse, which has a major location in New York City, agreed to pay roughly $2.6 billion in penalties. It's the most prominent bank to plead guilty in the United States since Drexel Burnham Lambert in 1989, and the largest to do so since the Bankers Trust in 1999.
In the course of our painstaking, years-long investigation, the department discovered that Credit Suisse and its subsidiaries engaged in an extensive and a wide-ranging conspiracy to help U.S. taxpayers evade taxes. The bank actively helped its account holders to deceive the IRS by concealing assets and income in illegal, undeclared bank accounts. These secret offshore accounts were held in the names of sham entities and foundations.
Well, in Singapore today, ministers from 12 nations trying to create a U.S.-Pacific trade pact say that they have made meaningful progress, though they were unable to reach a final agreement. For the first time since late April, U.S. and Japanese delegates held bilateral talks on market access, a contentious issue for both sides. Well, the TPP is the main economic component of U.S. President Barack Obama's so-called pivot to Asia, which is also considered a litmus test now for whether Japan's prime minister is willing to challenge special agricultural interests at home.
In Tokyo, when President Obama and Prime Minister Abe were together, we have continued our consultations. That progress allowed us to chart a pathway forward. It was a milestone that allowed us to enter a new phase of the negotiations. There are still issues to resolve before reaching an agreement.
Well, on average, growth in African economies is now set to accelerate to 4.8% this year, while financial flow into the continent will top $200 billion, quadrupling the levels seen in 2000. This according to the African Development Bank. Well, at the start of its annual meeting in the Rwandan capital, Kigali, the bank had a positive outlook on the continent's growth prospects, though it tempered its message with warnings on security in parts of Africa, adding that job creation was paramount now to warding off the risk of social discontent. On average, the bank expects economic growth across the continent to reach 5.7% by 2015, putting its trajectory now back on the path to where it was before the global financial crisis. And Russia is reportedly close to signing a decades-long contract to supply natural gas now to China at a price that would value the deal at some $400 billion. Russian President Vladimir Putin arrives in Shanghai today to try and complete an agreement after more than 10 years of talks. Well, the stumbling blocks have been centered around prices, but with Putin now facing sanctions from both the U.S. and EU after annexing Crimea, a deal is seen as probable. China is Russia's largest trading partner. Business last year hit $94.5 billion. In fact, China was the only country in the UN Security Council not to condemn Putin's actions in Ukraine. A final deal is likely to be made by Putin and his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, today. And millions of slaved and forced laborers around the world are generating an estimated $150 billion a year in profits for their exploiters. This according to a new report being released today from the International Labor Organization. The ILO's definition of forced labor encompasses commercial sexual exploitation, work under slavery-like conditions, and involuntary labor resulting from force, fraud, or deception. Slavery is banned by international law. In 2012, the ILO estimated close to 20.9 million people are engaged in forced labor. Some 14.2 million are forced to work in fields like agriculture, construction, mining, and domestic care, while 4.5 million are sexually exploited. An additional 2.2 million are engaged in state-imposed labor, which encompasses work in prisons or even military. Well, two top universities from Israel and China have announced plans to start a $300 million research project focusing on nanotechnologies. The partnership between Tel Aviv University and Beijing Tsinghua University will study early stage and mature technologies in biotech, solar energy, water, as well as environmental technology. Well, the partnership is part of what some techies in Israel have been calling China Week. At least 400 Chinese government and business officials landed in Israel on Sunday to take part in a series of business forums and seminars, including the first ever Israel-China Economic Summit and also the Israel Innovation Conference, the largest Israeli tech event of the whole year. Amid an increasingly competitive market for mobile phones, Blackberry has a new strategy, this time in emerging markets. Daniel Roth brings us the story.
Though it was believed to be destroyed, Blackberry isn't laying down its arms. Despite huge losses of nearly $6 billion, the Canadian group hasn't lost hope and even launched its new Model Z3 in Indonesia.
As everybody knows, Indonesia is a huge market for us, and one of the biggest, I was told, right? Which I agree. We want to be very competitive in the handset business, and with our relationship with the Foxconn, the new way of doing things, we're able to not only offer this, but we offer it in a very timely fashion.
In collaboration with Taiwanese subcontractor Foxconn, the company has designed a new BlackBerry smartphone, this time with a full touch screen, a low-cost device sold at less than $200 each.
And obviously, emerging markets, the consumer space is very important, and we think we have an ability to participate and compete.
$200 is still too expensive for most Indonesians, though. 40% of the population lives on about $2 a day. Today, only the rich can afford a smartphone, and BlackBerry has plenty of competition.
Di sini kan sebenarnya pangsa pasar perkantoran juga ya.
This is a central business district, so demand for BlackBerry is high. Although there is demand for Android and iPhone in the market, but people are still enthusiastic about BlackBerry.
Ya, masih antusias pasarnya.
Today, Samsung is dominating the market in the largest economy in Southeast Asia. One of 3 smartphones sold in Indonesia was designed by the South Korean giant. BlackBerry is far behind, with only 4% of the market share and some 100,000 units sold in the first 3 months of the year.
Lebanon's economy has felt the strain from Syria's civil war, but this year's lack of rainfall is now also putting pressure on Lebanese businesses. Here's the story.
For farmers here in the Bekaa Valley, these are worrying times. With very little winter snow and rain, Lebanon is facing its worst drought in 80 years.
Due to the lack of rain in Lebanon this year, the crop production has dropped to 50%, and we're afraid that we will go dry this year.
This year's rainfall was half normal levels. As a result, the riverbeds and wells used to irrigate crops may fall to dangerously low levels. And finding more water is no easy task.
For 50 years, Lebanon has been pumping the groundwater table, and it's recently experienced a significant drawdown. Before, we could find water at 20 meters, and now we have to dig wells down to 200 meters to pump water for the farmers and supply our cities.
Water cuts in the capital are now frequent. Yet many Lebanese haven't modified wasteful habits, like washing their cars as much as 3 times a week. The company Just Wash is trying to satisfy demand without depleting Lebanon's valuable water supplies.
We wash a car with less than a cup of water, around 100 to 150 millimeters, compared to other stations that use an average of 150 liters of water. We're campaigning against water waste in Lebanon because we're getting to a point where we won't have any water anymore.
But more drastic measures may be needed. More than 1 million Syrian refugees now live in Lebanon, increasing the country's overall population 20% and placing further pressure on its limited resources.
Well, Indonesia is one of the worst electrified nations in the Southeast Asia, but now the government is turning to renewable energy to handle the country's growing needs. And on one island has an ambitious plan.
They don't have much light, but it's a lot more than they used to on the Indonesian island of Sumba. 300 homes in this village now have access to 24-hour electricity, thanks to a small hydroelectric generator in a river nearby.
With electricity, so much has changed. The kids can study at night, and I can weave baskets or mats like this one.
Indonesia is the world's fourth most populous country. Spread over 17,000 islands, it struggles to fuel its fast-growing economy and is listed as one of the region's worst electrified nations. The government hopes to use renewable sources to help increase electricity capacity by 60 gigawatts over the next 10 years. But communities on this remote island are aiming even higher.
We love to see that in 2025, the people on Sumba access to 100% from renewable energy.
The sun, wind, and rivers are not the only power sources here. Methane gas from pig dung is now being used for cooking. And the waste can be sold as fertilizer after its use, another source of income for people here.
It's helped us save a lot. Before we started using biogas, we had to buy oil and wood for cooking. If we work it out, we used to use 2 liters of oil a day to run the household. So in the 2 years we've been using biogas, we've saved more than 6 million rupiah.
That's about $500, a significant sum for this island of mostly subsistence farmers and fishermen. Small-scale projects won't provide enough power to close Indonesia's energy gap, but it's hoped they will spread across the country's islands, showing the world what renewable energy can do.
And now we go to Media Watch with our very own Daniel Roth. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. How's it going?
Good. So what do you have for us today?
Well, keeping on this sort of green energy kick from the last video, treehugger.com has this piece about Singapore, which is really miles ahead of a lot of places in terms of experimentation with green energy. They've been working on a closed water system that essentially reuses water for drinking and for cleaning. And the story is actually about a new solar farm that they're building that's going to be floating on the water. So they're not, well, some of it will be on roofs, but the really cool innovation is that it's going to be floating on the water, which is actually going to be good for keeping the water temperatures down, which is going to save space so that they can sort of utilize the most solar power without wasting space for people to live and walk.
Well, how unique is this concept? Has it been done before?
This is among the first places experimenting with this. This is, you know, once you read about it, it kind of pops in your head. And you're like, well, why isn't everyone doing this? Singapore is in a unique position because it's got access to water. A lot of places, well, definitely landlocked countries can't deal with this. It's also a very densely populated space, so it's easy for them to disseminate the electricity from the solar farm. So the context of Singapore makes it possible for Singapore to experiment with this. It's something that can and will be replicated around the world. That's something that we're seeing.
Okay, well, tell me, how does this actually work? I'm trying to fathom electricity and water, combining the two together.
Well, why don't we actually, we move to the Business Insider story about Germany, they've actually been implementing solar power using solar fields in really successful ways. So it works very much the same way. The Singapore example will work very much the same way as the Germany example. Only it's floating next to the city instead of on the land. In Germany, they've last quarter they had about 27% of their power was coming from renewable sources, so that's solar and wind. And actually, on May 11th, something really unique happened, and this is what Business Insider was reporting on. They had a moment, a couple of hours, where electricity was free in Germany because the solar power and the wind power kind of hit full power at the same time.
So they had a surplus, or?
Yeah, they like shot up in the surplus in the amount of electricity that they had, and for just a couple of hours, everyone had access to electricity for free. Now, it was momentary, and it rarely happens that wind and solar can coincide to give people free electricity, but it happened, and it's kind of indicative of what could happen down the road. You're looking in Singapore, you're looking in Germany. These are not similar places on Earth. They're different sizes. Everything's different about them, but they're both showing us that renewable energy is absolutely the wave of the future and something to look to if you're investing, if you're looking for the future of power.
That's fascinating. So what else do you have for us?
The Guardian had this piece that we'll get to down the road.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for the insight. We really appreciate it as always. And that wraps up our coverage now. Join us for more always tomorrow. And please send us your comments. We look forward to it.